art and his life. So when his life is threatened by fatal illness, his will tell his own story.
I didn't want to die. No, definitely didn't want to go. I wanted to stay here for quite a bit longer. So when you're on the edge like that, your brain's working harder than it ever has in your life.
Most of us take the world around us for granted, which means we don't notice it much at all. But sometimes a catastrophic event can bring home to us just how precious all this is, how beautiful our world can seem. This is the story of just such a discovery, and a discovery made by an artist. Faced with the prospect of his own imminent death, or at best a high-risk transplant operation, John Bellany painted the journey that's brought him to a new vision of life.
You never think anything like that is going to happen to you. You know, I think when you're very younger, you actually just think, I'm immortal. You know, I've got so many pictures to paint. I've got years and years and years. And of course, you're giving everything an absolute bash at 100 miles an hour. And then, what, you got a fright. Suddenly somebody says you're ill, and I've never been ill in my life. And of course, you get the terrible shock that you're much iller than you dreamt possible.
John Bellany became seriously ill in 1984 at the age of 42. For 3 years there were bouts of illness, his health steadily getting worse, yet all the time he was painting. Then from December 87 the prospects darkened, his liver was packing up. There were now repeated medical crises. But the force of his drive was sustaining his will to live.
They said to him, well, actually, John, I'm afraid it's not as good as you think, you know. I'm afraid to tell you that you do know that your life expectancy has been vastly reduced. And before he could finish the sentence, John had shouted out, but I want to live as long as Picasso.
If you've decided you don't want to die, you've got to do everything you can to do it. And it didn't seem to be physical. That was being done by someone else, like the surgeons. It was the longing to fight again. It really was, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light. If you give up for a split second, you're dead. And I think it's like that Dylan Thomas quote. I mean, it's incredibly easy to die. This is the thing that surprised me of the whole experience of this recent thing with the operation, is that it's incredibly easy to die. It's much harder to live.
John Bellany was born in the little fishing village of Port Seton on the southern shores of the Firth of Forth. His father and both his grandparents were fishermen and boat builders. He grew up among boats and fish, gulls, the harbour, a rich and happy background, a close and happy family. The images of that background inform his work. Seabirds of all kinds, fish of all kinds, boats, lighthouses, all the matter of the sea and its people.
John, you remember the day that you fell in the harbour when you were drunk?
Keep that, got all that stuff quiet. The main thing is I got out.
No, he's never been a realistic painter in the sense that he was setting out to copy nature. It's always, he's used objects, animals, birds, people, a way in which he tries to see beyond the obvious reality.
Is his work very much resonant with religious feeling, do you think?
I think it's deeply imbued with religious feeling, in the obvious sense that he was brought up in a very Calvinistic fishing village, and so from the very beginning he had to wrestle with Presbyterian Christian ideas. And in a way, I think that gave rise, as it were, the Old Testament, the New Testament. These are very, very vivid stories. The idea of good and evil, all these things, are deeply ingrained in his work. And though they're not always, in the forefront of perhaps the subject, they're always, I think, somewhere in the background.
My childhood was so filled with that Calvinist religious domination that the images that stick in your mind at that age, all the Bible thumping from the pulpit and the Sunday school and all that sort of stuff. It was really heavyweight stuff going into your brain. And of course that lasts for the rest of your life, whether you reject it or whether you accept it. It's still lingering there all the time. And at moments of where you're going through the trials and tribulations, that stuff comes to the fore.
Symbols of mortality were in his work from the start. The clock ticking away the hours appears over and over again. The cards dealt by fate, another recurring image. But he was also enjoying life, marriage and children, conviviality and drink. Drink, and too much of it, was to touch a genetic weakness.
I often used to think that they'd sent us the Welshman Dylan Thomas and the Irishman Brendan Behan. All we needed now was a Scotsman, and we got one, John Bellamy. He was a hell of a lad to spend a night with that lasted all next day, and most of the following one as well. We used to sit up all night drawing each other or painting each other. We always used to draw. I never painted him. He painted me, although the last time he painted a picture of me, I stood there all night with my duffel bag over my shoulder, and I think by the end of the session he changed it into a self-portrait with two parrot heads. But, it was an extremely enjoyable experience.
He's full of joie de vivre, really. And he could get completely over the top and wild and everything, but it was really as an enjoyment of life. There's never really any bad side to that, except it's a bit, difficult to handle at times.
He had married his first wife, Helen, in 1964, when he was 22. She figures in his paintings more than any other image except his own. They had 3 children, Jonathan, Paul, and Anya. Then, from the late 70s, his emotional life became more turbulent. He divorced and married Juliet. At this point, drinking became more serious.
My second wife was chronically ill with manic depression, and she was in and out of hospital all the time, and there was nothing that anyone could do, and she was just steadily becoming more and more ill. And I suppose, although it was unconsciously done, I was maybe trying to just kind of put the pain of that aside, and maybe the knocking back the Bacardi was, numbed the pain, which I was feeling inside myself because of the helplessness of not being able to do anything else apart from cherish her.
In 1985, his second wife Juliet was to die. He was to remarry his first wife. The turbulence and distress is evident in the paintings of that period. Bellamy is a painter of passionate intensity, an expressionist who doesn't shrink from putting the rawness of his own feelings on canvas. And he does it with brilliant use of colour and imagery. Over the years, it has put him in the world class as an artist, with a reputation that is still growing today.
I've been working on this picture for about 2 months, and it's been getting worse and worse and worse. So this is a last-ditch attempt to rescue it, otherwise it's for the rubbish bin. I think what also happens, it can get very bitty, and I think this is what's happening at the moment. It's just try and get the whole picture going. It's not just some kind of self-centered bit of splashing about. You're hoping that by taking on the kind of like the subject matter of these recent things, that it's going to help the viewer who's looking at that to actually see themselves in a more profound light than they did before they saw that image that I've created. You know, I'm not expecting everybody to like them. It's not about liking them, or it's about actually if the things are meaningful to them, whether they dislike them. I can't say whether somebody's going to like something or dislike it. That's not up to me, that's up to the viewer himself. But I hope they'll be moved by them or affected in some way.
When the illness struck with its possible sentence of death, he faced up to it, painting his fears, even his despair, as intensely as he continued to live his life. By 1986, he was busy planning a major retrospective for the Edinburgh Festival.
He suffered terribly, and for instance, one time he had kidney stones, which is an excruciating pain, and of course we didn't know what it was. So there were occasions like this regularly when he'd become suddenly terribly ill. But it didn't improve his health, but it gave him a wonderful goal to work towards, and me. It was very, very difficult for me, I think, because, you know, he used to talk about plans for the future and plans for his work and what we would do at this stage of his life and things. And although I was absolutely thrilled that all these wonderful things were happening for him, I knew it was going to come to an end, that he mightn't ever see the exhibition, which I dearly wanted him to be there at that opening. And you know, I used to have very great difficulty trying to be positive and saying, oh, how wonderful this is, and then going away and crying in a corner because it was just too difficult. The extremes were just too difficult to handle at times.
Throughout the spring of 1988, it became clear the options were narrowing. A liver transplant, if it were successful, could save his life. Nothing else would. By now, his paintings, too, had weakened in colour and density.
The work over that period seemed to have a strange kind of light to it. I don't know if it was it may have been a sunset light, because I think at the back of my mind I knew, you know, that the black raven was on my shoulder all that time. I knew that it was really, my days were numbered.
I think the fear of everything, his illness, everything was, he didn't sleep, and so he'd paint all night. And the paintings had to be done because, well, if I'm not going to be here much longer, I never know what's going to happen to me, then I want to do this and I want to do that. But he didn't actually, I just know what he feels, terrified. And we just knew what each other were thinking, you know, we just knew that we were both terrified. And that was enough, I think, to just know. He knew I understood how he was feeling.
Where does the fear come from?
I think he did have very, very naive beliefs about heaven and hell from when he was a child. And I think that they've taken, they're there in all the paintings and everything, and the fear of death that, you know. I also think that really after his trip to Buchenwald concentration camp, that really had a profound effect on him and his work. He no longer had such a clear sense of heaven. It was more the other side of things that obsessed him then. I think before that he might have had a stronger feeling that a heaven was possible. But I don't really think that he can hold on to that very easily.
At this stage, he didn't know if he was going to have the operation or not. It's a tragic piece in a way, and he's surrounded by all his friends, and they all seem to be disintegrating in front of you, and he seems to be disintegrating too in front of their very eyes. But at the same time, it has this dichotomy. It's painted rather boldly. The colours still suggest, you know, a love of life, a sense of hopefulness. So you have this very strange thing in this painting of disintegration and hope.
In the last week of April, the call came. John Bellamy went into Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge. The operation could go ahead. Then something remarkable happened. Rather than set aside his painting while he had such a critical operation, he pressed on more insistently than ever with work he felt he still had to do. Throughout it all, the artist was to record the rebirth of the man.
He just got himself settled in his bed and he said, Helen, bring in the portfolio and the watercolours and this type of paper, and could you go to the art shop and get that? And actually, to be quite honest, you know, I had other things to think about. Just was he going to be alive next day, that kind of thing. But there I was coming up in the lift with all the other visitors with this massive portfolio and bag of paints and things, and he just said to. But you see, I knew that it gave him a lot of calmness inside himself. It was something he had to do which kept him calm and occupied his mind and took his mind off the reality.
I got the call from the transplant coordinators that there was a liver available of the same blood group as John's about 8 p.m. about that, and I went through and told him that we had a liver ready for him. So he was very excited and he was very worried, I think, as well, and he asked me if I would sit for him that evening, which I did. And anaesthetic time was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I saw him being wheeled down, and he said, look on the desk, and he'd spent most of the night painting to get it finished before he went to theatre and have it ready for me.
The liver transplant took place on April 30th last year. He was in the operating theatre for 8 hours.
I remember coming round, and of course I was in intensive care with all these tubes and stuff all over the place. And I remember waking up, and there was a nurse standing beside me, see, and I said, am I alive? I had to write, I couldn't speak because I was all tubes everywhere, and a mask on and all this kind of, you know, over my nose. And she gave me a bit of paper, asked for a bit of paper, and I've got the bit of paper, I've kept a piece of paper, and I said, am I alive, you see? And she said, yes, I could hear her speaking. And I said, can I touch you? So I touched her hand, and I said, can I touch your cheek? And once before, when I had thought I was gone, or in St Thomas's, I did all that. I could touch the person, and I said, can I draw? You see, and I couldn't draw, and I thought, oh, I'm dead. I can't draw. I'm dead. And so this time in Addenbrooke's, I said, can you give me a bit of paper? I wrote this down, a piece of paper. Can I draw you? You see? And she, that's a very strange request from somebody. So she gave me the bit of paper and a biro or something, and I drew her thing. And I've kept the drawing, and I knew I was alive because I could draw, and it was an incredible moment. And I think that was the real, you know, serenity beyond words. That was the serene moment of all time. Just knowing I was alive, and that thing had been successful.
I came into the unit terrified, and I said tentatively, "How is he?" And they said, "Oh well, he's begun to come round. You know, he was by this time sleeping and drifting to and fro." But they said, "Yes, he's been trying to draw us already." And I, oh well, everything's going to be all right.
The hospital had seen nothing like it. A neat clinical ward transformed into an Aladdin's cave of colour, glowing with the unstoppable torrent of new work. Every visitor was pressed into sitting for him. Nurses, the ward sister, the visiting surgeon all took their place in the gallery of portraits. And the intensity of the experience somehow inspired a new level of creativity.
The pictures themselves get more cheerful than optimistic. Naturally, as the pain was receding. But I think the other thing, looking at the stuff just now, is that the effect of the colour, actually, I'm sure that must have helped me to get better as well, because if you think of these walls, this kind of Arctic blue, and suddenly there's colour everywhere, I'm sure that must have lifted the spirits too. Even though a lot of the colour's blood, it doesn't really matter. It's a nice cadmium red. I think more importantly than that, to me as a person, was the fact that with all these pictures, because of the situation was so desperate, that not only was I seeing myself getting better, as I said, but I was also actually trying my absolute hardest with each painting, and then to sit back at the end of it and have the thing put up on the wall and look at it and judge it and, you know, look for faults and think maybe this bit's all right or this bit's hopeless, and actually kept my mind alert and alive, because I think the psychological part of the recovery from a big operation like that is probably more difficult than the physical side of it, you know.
Which is the one that most expresses what you did or feel?
I think the drawing, which is behind me, I think that's maybe the best thing I've ever done in my life. That's the one where I thought that nearly drew itself. That I think the link, it was a direct line to creativity, and I think it just happened. It was so simple, and I think that kind of a intensity, I think maybe you get once in your lifetime. But I think something like Picasso had that lots of times, or Michelangelo, but I think I had the great privilege to have that once, and that makes all the other hard work and all the pain and everything worthwhile just for that one piece of intensity, because I think that's maybe contributes something to the human race. If somebody can look at that picture and get some kind of feeling back from it with the same depth that I had when I was doing it. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
He had a great wish to recover, I think, because he has creative work to do. He did that very strongly. It was extraordinary that the day he came out of the intensive unit, he asked not for analgesics, but for paper and paint. And lying on his back with a shaving mirror, he started doing a series of paintings which I think are very remarkable. We've done nearly 600 liver transplants, and in my experience of these cases, and also general surgery for many, many years, I've never come across anybody who, the day they came out of the intensive care ward, started resuming their profession. And I think that is a very unique characteristic of him.
The artistic experience was one thing, its medical significance quite another. Medical science is constantly engaged in helping patients handle pain. Dependence on drugs can only go so far. John Bellany's experience went further and had the medical men coming to his bedside to observe and ask. Bellany, the artist, could block his own pain.
You can't describe how bad the pain is. I mean, people who've had pain know what I'm talking about. But that's behind you, that's behind me now. I'd rather not dwell on that. But when I was doing these drawings and some of the watercolours, when I was actually working, when the pencil was touching the paper, the pain went. You know, I was concentrating so much that I think the mind was so focused on what I was doing that the pain was alleviated. And sometimes I just went on and on and on and worked right through for maybe 7 hours at a stretch just because the pain was so bad.
Did you find enough to paint from a hospital bed?
Because I was looking inwards, you see. I wasn't just looking outwards at the mirror. I was plumbing the depths. But if you look at a Rembrandt self-portrait, it's not just a guy looking in a mirror and seeing if he can get the highlights on his forehead right and the wee pimple on his nose or something. It's not about that. It's about a guy baring his soul to the world. Same with Van Gogh. There's not just, you know, oh, he's got a bonny bit of painting, oh, he's got a nice highlight on his cheek or something. That's nothing to do with that. It's a guy bearing his soul, hoping to touch humanity, to move people, and also to fulfill himself, to express himself to the extent that he's almost in pain with the effort. It's extending, it's to extend frontiers.
Within the hospital, Bellany found a fellow enthusiast. Professor Roy Kahn, the Addenbrooke surgeon who pioneered organ transplant operations there, is himself a keen and able painter.
It was exactly 1 week after the operation. He came in on the Saturday, and he talked about painting. He says, I do a bit of dabbling with the paints myself, you see. And he says, I'll bring them in and show you them. So he showed me the things. They were quite, I thought they were pretty good. I said, I'll tell you what, would you mind if I do a drawing of you since you've given me the elixir of life? So he sat there and I drew him, and since then we've become, you know, great pals. So in fact I've given him a few pearls of wisdom about his work, and he paints away like mad.
In no time, Professor Kahn was taking regular lessons in watercolour painting from Bellany. The two men painted portraits of each other. And it was Professor Kahn who received on behalf of Addenbrooke's the gift Bellany made to the hospital of his painting, The Patient. It's destined to hang in the concourse there. It's now almost a year since the transplant operation. Bellany himself continues to recover, and the work itself continues to enjoy a vigorous renewal of colour and energy.
Since the operation, there's been a kind of flooding back into John of immense energy, you know, a love of life, which was always there anyway. It always has been. That's always been one of his great characteristics. And this has resulted in I think, almost a return to full power in his painting. There's been a tremendous blaze of absolutely brilliant colour. I mean, he always has been a very strong, dynamic colourist, but I think the colour since the operation, I mean, he wrote to me his first letter after the operation, saying that, in fact, this part of the letter was in capital letters, printed, saying that he now realised that colour was the most important thing in painting. It's like blood surging back into the body of the paintings.
You've spoken about your debt to Professor Kahn and the hospital. You owe a debt to someone else, and that's the person who gave you the liver.
That's right.
What do you feel about the person?
I think about that every day, because here am I, you know, now I'm so full of vitality and joy, and I think, oh my goodness, the family of this, the loved ones of that person, you know, he's gone, and here I am, thanks to, you know, his generosity. So you do think about these things quite a lot.
You have a relationship with a stranger.
That's right, yeah. Very kind stranger as well. No, I think about that a lot. Because I would be dead if it wasn't for that stranger. When I was listening to music after the operation, I was overcome because of the emotion, but music had a much greater effect on me than it ever had before. And I kept thinking, you know, in these lyrical moments of this, I've got a composer's liver, because it was so enriching, you know. I mean, that's just me being a bit daft, but it felt like that at the time, you know. So you do wonder who the person was.
The career is back on course too. On March 31st, his latest exhibition opens in a West End gallery. In the last year, he's travelled to Hamburg for a major retrospective of his work there. There's been one in Los Angeles too, and one-man shows in Bath and Lancaster. From Easter, the hospital watercolours go on show at the National Gallery of Scotland prior to a world tour. As a Royal Academician, he's to be one of the selectors of this year's summer exhibition. Life has never felt so good. Just being alive has a sensuality of its own.
Everything was, I was seen and felt and listened to with heightened awareness, music as well. All these things, it was like, I'll tell you what it was like, and it sounds a bit corny, but this is exactly what it was like. It was like as if I had a plant is a bit dowdy and it's wilting, it's a bit fed up, you know. And then you water the plant, and wow, the things just blossoms out. And that's how I felt, that's what happened.
Is that, do you think, because you'd been so close to death?
Probably. I mean, it really, because I had actually been almost there. I think the door had been opened. I wasn't just knocking at the door this time. I think it had been opened a bit. And then to have got the reprieve and to got the chance to go on, I just felt the luckiest man in the universe, you know. And of course, because of the strength that coming back and all the, it flooded through everything, and especially, it wasn't just my eyes, my hearing as well. When I put music on, I could hear every chord, every note. I was listening to some Sibelius, and I thought, oh, and you could, I almost felt like I was a composer. You could feel the shifts, the chords changing and the tone going on into the depths and up into some light stuff. It was utterly exhilarating. And the same thing happened with colour. You were asking about colour. When I looked at some of the things paintings I had done before, everything had gone through white, you know, it was all blanched and everything. Suddenly, whack, bold colours were coming out, and I loved the colours. And I hadn't actually noticed that the colours of my painting had gone a bit jaded. I suppose they were just reflecting my own being. It wasn't a conscious thing. It's suddenly bright colours, and the other thing is I looked at paintings with a fresh eye. That people suddenly became heroes that I had always just admired, but never thought as being as grand as they were. You know, especially Matisse. I just feel I'm so lucky to be alive at all. You know, not a second has to be wasted.
It's such an obvious question, but you're better equipped than most to answer it. What is it that makes life worth living?
This is a John Cleese special. What is the meaning of life? I think it's one. I don't know what you could say. I really have to give the corniest answer ever and just say love. Yeah, it is. I think that's just the secret of everything. I think that's the basis of everything. Is love. Love of, not, you know, of nature, of obviously of mankind. I think we've just got to love each other in as deep a way as we can, and not lose track of that, not get sidetracked away into the trivial things of life.